Please pray with me. God, may the words of my mouth and meditation in each heart be acceptable in your sight, for you are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, I don't know how it was in the other pod groups, but I can tell you in the two that I was in, we had some really lively discussion about this gospel lesson. So it's really in two parts. There's the first part where Jesus is talking to them about the people dying, and then there's the second part where the parable is. I do want to spend just a moment on the first part because some people find it a little hard to understand. Jesus is talking about some tragedies that have happened, and then saying, do you think this happened to these people because they were worse sinners than other people? And basically, he says, no, they weren't. And then he goes on to say, but unless you repent, you'll perish just like they did. They did. And so I thought, now how can I modernize this a little bit? Because sometimes it's so hard for us to understand what Jesus might be talking about. So I'm going to start off by telling you this, or asking you this question. Do you think the people in Flint, Michigan, are worse than anybody else in Michigan because of what happened to their water supply and how they are suffering? No, I tell you. But unless someone steps up and does what needs to be done, all will perish in that area. Sounds strong, doesn't it? I was reading some stuff this week about how different people are reacting to that tragedy. First of all, it came out of a desire to save money. Michigan's been kind of depressed for a while, the entire state, and so the idea was to save money. They stopped getting water from Detroit, which was treated water, and they started getting water from the lake, not treated. And because of the difference in the water itself, I understand, that's what took all the lead pipes, corroded them more, broke the lead down, and took it into people's homes. But I wonder in those two examples that Jesus used, as well as this one about Flint, if we look at that exactly the way Jesus would want us to. And so that kind of takes us to the second part of the reading today, the wonderful parable of the fig tree. And so, first of all, we need to understand something, and it is difficult to understand. So I'm telling you that right now. We look at things that happen in our world, and whether we mean to or not, often we ask, maybe not out loud, maybe in our hearts, this question: why would God allow that to happen? That's a question that's been asked for centuries. It was a question that was being asked of Jesus, basically. Why would God let this happen? And Jesus, in no uncertain terms, says, it's not because of the people. The people weren't being punished for anything. In Jesus' time, that's what everyone thought. In fact, some of you may remember when Jesus was confronted about a young man who was blind. And Jesus was asked, is it his parents who sinned or him that he is blind? Well, we do the same thing now. We ask these hard questions. And we ask, why in the world would God let these things happen? God doesn't. God doesn't let things happen to people. God lets us allow things that happen to people. You see, this is the conflict, if you want to call it that, or what we look at all the time when we look at who we are as humanity. Created in God's own image. But from the very beginning of creation, we, humanity, was given authority. If you think about the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, if you think about the fact that humanity was given the authority over everything on earth. So who's in charge of things on earth? Who's in charge? We are. Now, does that mean God doesn't care? Absolutely not. Does it mean God tries to guide us each and every day? Yes, absolutely it does. But bottom line is, we are people created with free will. Just like, well, I wonder, how often have you, any of you, tried to blame what happens to you on somebody else? Okay, you don't have to confess. It's okay. But, you know, I think it's kind of human nature. You might remember, no, some of you won't remember because you're too young. But if you're older, you might remember a show, and a phrase that came out of that show was, "The devil made me do it." There might be some truth to that, I'm not really sure. But I can tell you this, that God depends on us to make a difference in the world. And very often, if we don't make that difference, nothing changes. So let's go back to Flint for a moment. What's going to happen? Well, very interesting things have happened already. First of all, this has been going on for 2 years, and it's just within the last 6 months we're beginning to hear about it. Some people are upset and angry, and I don't blame them a bit. But for the first time, I think we're getting national attention to one place, it needs to go other places too, but one place where we, American citizens, people who reside in this country, can make a difference. And yes, it's going to cost money. It's going to cost money to get everything cleaned up there. It's going to cost money to get them good, clean, healthy water. And unfortunately, much of the damage has already been done. So do we look and say, well, you know, we live in Florida. That's not our problem. Yes, it is our problem. It's our problem because we are citizens of the world. Anything that happens on this planet should be our concern. And I know sometimes it's just mind-boggling how many things need to be done. And no, we cannot solve every problem, but, and I've said this before and I believe it with my whole heart, everything we need, everything any person needs on this planet is here. That's how God takes care of us, giving us every resource, every invention, every technology that we can make a difference here. But if you look at the world, you see the very, very unbalanced use of resources. And we, as people of the United States of America, consume more than we produce. Now think about that for a minute. We consume more than we produce, which means people from other countries are producing for us and sending it here. Perfect example, bananas. We don't grow any bananas here. I worked for Winn-Dixie for a while, know all about bananas, including how they put them in gas chambers, which maybe you don't want to hear about. But so bananas come from other countries because we like bananas. And so we pay for bananas. And yet the people in the countries where the bananas grow are struggling to survive. Something's not right. And I could go on and name 14 or 15 other things, but I won't. I picked bananas because I like them. I'll just name one more, and that's coffee. And I don't even like coffee. But there are people who just have to have their coffee. And and think about where coffee comes from. No, we do not grow coffee in the United States. So that's something else we import. Yet where coffee is grown, many different places actually, we see the population struggling to survive. Now, I'm not going to tell you I know the answer because I don't. But here's what I do know. I do know we are meant to help in each and every way. So far from that first part of the gospel, please understand that God does not make disasters. God does not cause things to happen. That it's the natural order of things in many instances, and in the others it's humanity and what we've done to cause some of these things. But the second part of the parable carries a special message, or second part of the reading, which is the parable, carries a very special message for each and every one of us. It's the parable of the fig tree. It's a very interesting parable because it appears in some form or another in other Gospels. But the Gospel writer of Luke has tailor-made this parable to speak to that community and where they were at the time. You see, there's this whole idea about insiders and outsiders. People that belong and people that don't belong. We talked about in our pod group, actually in both of them, what kind of message was Jesus wanting us to hear? Was the owner of the garden God? Was the gardener Jesus? Are we the fig trees? Or was the owner of the garden Jesus? And we are the gardeners, and humanity is the fig tree. You can pick any one you like, because one of the wonderful things about the parables are very seldom does Jesus explain what he means. And he did not in this instance. But the writer of Luke wanted people to hear this. Wanted people to hear that it's each and every one of our responsibilities to either bear fruit, if you want to think of us as the fig tree, or to enable fruit to be born, if you want to think of us as the gardener. Now this is an interesting time of year because if you are from Florida, if you know anything about Florida, it's the time of year when the last freeze has gone. It will not come again, and we have to start taking care of plants and trees and bushes. There's trimming that needs to be done. Certainly fertilizer helps. You should do only organic, wonderful, natural stuff. And sometimes it's very difficult to make a decision about when it's time to cut something down. I am a person who gives second, third, fourth, and fifth chances to plants. I mean, it's like, I will cut it down, I will wait, and I look. And I look for the slightest little piece of new growth, and then I rejoice. And I dig around it and all of that. And if it doesn't make it 1 year, I go, well, I'll give it another year. Because I really did like it when it grew, and I don't want it to be gone forever. We have a tree in our backyard. I was estimating how old it was because I planted it when it was a baby. And I'm thinking it's between 40 and 50 years old. And it's a golden rain tree, and I don't know if you know about them or not. But this golden rain tree is dead. I am so sad about it. I watched it grow from a baby, and it's such a perfect tree for Florida. Let me tell you why. In the winter, when you want the warmth of the sun, it has no leaves. But in the summer, when the sun is hottest, it shades unbelievably. So it was really hard for me to finally say it's time to have this tree cut down. And what's interesting about the golden rain tree is something else. It doesn't rot. It petrifies. And if you've ever cut one, you'll know that. Inside of it is as solid and as hard as it can be. There's no rot on that tree at all, but petrified. Really hard. And the young man who's going to cut it down for us told me, he said, it's hard for us to even get our spikes in the tree as we climb because it's so hard. And I think, there's got to be a reason that it's gotten so hard. There's got to be something we can use it for. So if you know us, you know we're saving what's cut down. And we're going to try to figure out something to do with it. And when I figure out something, we'll let you know. But, so back to all this about second and third chances. How many of you, don't have to raise your hands, but just think about it. How many of you like to be given a second chance? Some people call it a do-over, okay? So, you like it? Are you okay with when someone gives you a second chance? How about a third chance? You like having a third chance sometimes when you've messed up again and you want another chance? Dick's going to take all of them. So, but how many of you won't give second and third chances? How many of us are so judgmental that we don't look for opportunities to give people another chance? Yes, I admit, sometimes there are people who get on our very last nerve. And you're at your wit's end, and then, okay, I'm guilty of this, so I can say it. And then we use wonderful excuses about how not to give them another chance. And you hear words like enable. Well, if we help them again, we're enabling them. Or we hear words like, you know, they have to learn. And sometimes the only way you can learn is to fail. I'm guilty because I've used both those excuses. But as I was reading and getting ready for the sermon today, I realized, at least from my point of view, I'm wrong. I don't get to call how many times. I don't get to make judgment. It's like when you drive by those people at stop signs or interstate exits and they have signs up and they say, I'm hungry. I need help. A lot of them are now signed, God bless you. And there was a time early on in my life that I thought, well, then go get a job. Confess. Okay? I know you're only going to buy cigarettes. I know you're going to get some alcohol. And then I had to come to the harsh realization that it's not my call. It's not my call. If I have something to help someone with, if I have money in the car, I'm supposed to give it to them. And let me tell you something about what happens when I personally do that. I feel good about it. And all of a sudden, there is no judgment about what they will do with the money. There's only the realization that God has blessed me so that I can bless someone else. Now, I know some of you are sitting there, and I know some of you have done exactly what I've done. Driven by those people, not given them a second look. And yes, in the wintertime, a lot of people come to Florida, homeless people, and you see them everywhere. If you have the resources to help, you have to help. This is what I believe is one of the biggest problems in the world. My mother and father grew up in the Great Depression. I have the little stamps that they used to use to go and get stuff. And maybe from that generation, there came this attitude of scarcity, and you want to hold on to everything you have, and you don't want to let it go. And maybe from that generation came the people who are hoarders, who just grab and keep and grab and keep, because maybe sometime in their lives, they didn't have enough. And they want to make sure that never happens again. I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's prevalent in our society. People who have way more than they'll ever use. People who have too much stuff. And you've heard me say it before. We accumulate so much stuff, we have to rent storage buildings and storage places to put it. We have so much stuff that we don't know where to put it anymore. I have made an observation. True or not, this is my observation. Garages do not hold cars anymore. You drive by neighborhoods and you see all kinds of garages. You see the cars parked in the driveway. And on those occasions when you see the garages open, they're full of stuff, not cars. This whole idea of second chances and sharing what we've been blessed with is, I think, at the very basis of what we must be doing. You may remember that over the last couple of weeks, I've been giving you things to think about during this season of Lent. things to think about, and here's another one for this week. Think about what you have. Think about the blessings in your life. And then think how you can help others. And never hesitate for one moment on giving someone a second or a third or a fourth chance. Because someday you might need it too. Please pray with me. God, we have to admit that often, we put our needs first, we put our comforts first, we put a lot of stuff in front of what we know you want us to do. And so God, right now we have a request. Open our eyes and our hearts to what you want us to do. Open our eyes and our hearts to the needs around us. Open our eyes